Hey guys, this is Professor Miller and I have this micro lecture for you this week about the digital divide. The digital divide is something that's very close to my heart. It's something that's in being in technology and communications over the years has really been something that I've done a lot of research on, and I wanted to take some time to break it down for you a little bit because I don't think that the book did a good enough job doing so. So hang with me here for a couple of minutes. There's a couple of key terms that we want to make sure that we understand when we talk about the digital divide. And number one is going to be infrastructure. So when we talk about infrastructure, certainly internationally, one of the biggest reasons that third world countries don't have the internet, or certainly have the internet in the way that we have the internet here, is simply because they don't have the infrastructure. I mean, think of all of the things that you need to utilize the internet. You certainly need electricity. You need some type of device. Those things are expensive, and frankly, there isn't the infrastructure for it. I mean, there are many third world countries that don't and struggle to keep an active power grid. So even just in this country where we have electricity, of course, unless the skies open up, we have electricity. There's people in countries that, even I went to the Dominican Republic, and they said that there's constantly brownouts because of too much electric usage, and that the government actually regulates the electricity usage. So it's difficult for people in those countries to have a reliable access to the internet. I mean, even within our own country, sometimes in rural areas there isn't the infrastructure for internet, and maybe even up until recently, people were having to use things like satellite internet. So understanding the importance of having infrastructure is a very important idea and an aspect to understanding the digital divide. I mean, like I said, what do we need to operate a cell phone? Well, we need the phone, we need electricity, and then even so, we still need access to open Wi-Fi if we're going to use Wi-Fi or internet on our phones without using our data. Well, another thing that we want to talk about is access, and the idea that access is a relative term. Gaining access to a computer network or some method of communication is very important, and we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. So here's a couple things I want you to consider as we walk through the rest of this. Do all students inside of our country have equal access to technology? That's number one. And if not, are there groups of people who have less access to technology? There is a big difference here, though, and we're going to break this down. There's a big difference here between not having infrastructure and not having access. Big difference. So we're going to start off talking about the digital divide on a global level, and I'm going to motion to some of this stuff right here. Now, obviously, this PowerPoint does accompany this folder, so if you want to look at these specifically and look at some of the intricacies, I encourage you to do that. But for example, the areas in red are the areas with the most internet. Obviously, that's going to be the United States, much of Europe, Australia, Japan, are going to have basically between 50 and 90 computers per 100 people, which means that we have the most ability to get on the internet. On the other hand, the infrastructure as well. Where would you say has the best infrastructure as far as electrical grids, to implementing technology, things like that? You're going to talk about the same countries. US, Europe, Australia are going to have some of the best infrastructure. So it goes to say that they would have the best internet, which is true. Actually, Europe's internet blows ours away because, unfortunately, our internet's owned by a few companies who sort of have a lobby on everything. That's a whole different conversation. Obviously, where you're going to see a lack of internet are the same places you would expect to see a lack of infrastructure. Certainly most of Africa, certainly Southeast Asia, and certainly parts of South America. Now, Brazil has come a long way in industrializing, but still, same types of places. The places you would expect to have the least amount of internet are the places with the least amount of infrastructure. I mean, think about it. Africa, Southeast Asia, even parts of South America. Electricity is tough to come by. Clean drinking water is hard to come by. So the fact that we in this country take our technology and the internet so for granted is fantastic. But about the digital divide. The digital divide talks a lot about how countries that do not have proper infrastructure are never going to stop being third world countries. In fact, this divide continues to grow. The more and more technology we have in our country, the more technologically advanced we're going to have, the more on the uptick we're going to be. The more these third world countries don't try to develop infrastructure and try to develop access to the internet, the worse off they're going to be. And basically what's happening is we have the haves and the have-nots, and unfortunately it's getting worse. We as a country are continuing to advance and excel. People in Africa, Southeast Asia, South America are continuing to be oppressed. Now, we did talk in this week's discussion about how a lot of people, certainly in Southeast Asia, at least the manufacturers, are demanding more money. And actually, that's not a bad thing for the world, because as far as the digital divide goes, they're really struggling to compete in some of the worldwide, as far as the individual levels. I mean, sure, there's plenty of people with money in China. It's certainly growing and emerging as far as technologically, but still, the average person does not have the way of life that we even do in this country, and may never if they don't develop a stronger infrastructure to support the internet. Because as we know, the internet has changed the game as far as education, as far as the amount of knowledge that we have. It's really quite incredible. Here's another way to look at it. This was something I found I thought was very interesting. And basically what it is it talks about, again, I do refer you to the map because I know this is a little bit dark on the screen, but where you can see the bright lights is where the most internet access is. And it basically outlines much of the US and all of Europe, and certainly parts of Southeast Asia and Australia. But even down in Australia, you're only really getting the coastal cities here. Obviously, Central Australia is not the most ideal place to live, but the internet is nowhere near penetrated the entire world. And you can already see who the people who are advancing and where the areas that are advancing are. U.S., parts of Brazil, South America, all of Europe, Southeast Asia. Now, a lot of Southeast Asia there's not reliable data for as well, and that's what this map points out. But again, these third world countries that don't have access to internet, don't have access to even phones, certainly don't have computers, how is it ever going to get better for them? Third world countries have a really difficult time competing globally because they don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the electricity. They don't have the cell towers, right? They don't have the Wi-Fi strength. They don't have the Wi-Fi ability. A lot of these countries censor the internet from their citizens. So how are they going to be able to make the next move in becoming a more advanced society the way that we have in our country? In the way that, most jobs are not in manufacturing and farming like they used to be 100 years ago, and like they are in some of these countries. A lot of our jobs are certainly in business and in developing infrastructure in our country. And unfortunately, some of these countries, certainly many of them don't have the money, but also don't value the development of infrastructure the way we do. But they don't have the ability to access information. They can't. Even if they wanted to, they can't. They have no or very limited internet, cell phone technology, or for that matter, also television, radio, or even any kind of journalism in a lot of these countries. And because they don't have the internet, it's a big part of that. So we want to think, well, what are some of the problems that some of these citizens have? Well, one of them is clean drinking water. I wonder if being on the internet might help them find some clean drinking water. Something to think about. But it's not just internationally. It happens right here in our own country. There are millions of people in the United States that do not have access to the internet. And maybe not the access thing isn't the issue, because the infrastructure we have, almost anywhere you can have internet. Well, the issue with that in this country is the cost. I mean, think about it. What's your internet bill every month? And for many of you, it's part of your cable package, but even if you just had internet, you're looking at $70 or $80 a month. In addition, you need to have a device or devices to be able to even get on the internet. And we're to the point now where even in schools, kids are taking their tests online, kids are doing their homework online, and so if you don't have the internet in this country, imagine how far you would be set back. Imagine how much harder you would have to work to complete those assignments. Now I know that you might say, well, hey, you can always go to the library, and I think that's wonderful. And frankly, I'm glad that public libraries have developed the idea that the internet is so important to have as part of their platform. And I think it still made libraries relatively relevant even in 2017 with the advance of ebooks. But the bottom line is, the people that don't have this internet are the people who need it. Think about how jobs are gotten in this day and age. 20 years ago we could just, walk into a help wanted or look into classified ads. But now almost every job is done online. And in a lot of research, that's part of the reason that a lot of people in some of these lower socioeconomic categories really struggle to ever get out. And it's almost like a never-ending cycle of them because of the simple fact that, guess what? They don't have the same access that we do. We can pull out our phones and we can be on the internet in no time. But these people don't have the money, they don't have maybe even the technical knowledge to be able to function in the type of society that we are in now and moving toward. Which basically means, even in our own country, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, because they don't have the same access as we do because of the cost. There have been a lot of people in our country that have campaigned and lobbied to make the internet a public and regulated utility. Now, there's certainly both sides to the argument. People think if the government starts regulating it, then of course they're going to stick their nose in it, maybe restricting free speech. I understand that on one side. But realistically, on the other side, guys, people in our country have to have an internet that's affordable. In the same way that we have affordable gas coming into our home, and affordable water coming into our home, and affordable trash cleanup, taking the trash away from our homes. Guess what? We need internet too. But those that lack the means, so typically those with that are maybe potentially disabled, people that have a generally low income, are often not informed properly about the things they should be. Whether it's job availability, whether it's social issues, whether it's even stories about human rights, and certainly the knowledge of our elected officials. To be honest, one of the most important things in a democratic society is making sure that people have the ability to research candidates instead of just kind of guessing or talking to people secondhand. Think about it. The people with the lowest income, aren't they the ones that need this information the most to ever get out of the situation that they're in? They need the internet. And unfortunately, there are 75 million people in our country without the internet. And I know that you might sit there and think, that seems awfully strange. Guys, the internet is expensive. It's very expensive. I mean, you're talking about a minimum of $70 a month. And for some people, it might be the difference between, do I need the internet or do I need my next meal? So, to be perfectly honest with you guys, one of the most important things that I want to point out about this is we need to, as a country, start figuring out ways to make this happen for people. The internet is essential in our lives. We can't live without it. We've come to the point that we can't live without it. We must be able to regain the ability to help out those less fortunate, or we're always going to have this wage gap. So, thank you very much for stopping by and checking out and learning a little bit more about the digital divide, and we'll catch you next time.